At the end of the day, there's a range of options that the president could choose, but the most obvious ones, and frankly, the ones that he was speaking about on the White House lawn yesterday, are really to strike a deal or renew strikes. And I think that's exactly where we are. So if the president were to greenlight some additional military action against Iran, there's a few things that cut across what that window might be. Politically, obviously, he's got a visit coming up on May 14th to China. That is a high-stakes visit with President Xi. Economically, he has been very specific in saying that Iran is going to feel economic pain and that they are going to be overrun with oil within, frankly, previous few days, and that hasn't happened yet. And if you look at broader analysis, it seems to suggest that Iran has a little bit more of a runway on when they might actually, reach tank tops for some of the oil storage that it has. And then militarily, right now, there's a small window where there is 3 carrier strike groups in the region. The Ford has been on an extended deployment and is due to leave at any minute. But you need those 3 carriers because then you can have 2 in the Arabian Gulf, 1 prosecuting the strikes, 1 enforcing the blockade, and you can put another in the Red Sea to hold the Houthis at risk and make sure that those shipping lanes remain open as well. There are additional forces also en route to the Middle East, specifically Marines, and additional ground forces from the 82nd Airborne that have been long promised to be deployed. So we think that that gives this narrow window. Of course, the president could decide to strike at any time, or he could decide not to, but this provides the most logical window, the most operational window for potential strikes.
Paul Wallace, thanks for being with us this morning. We have some more sound from the president that I'm going to play you. But first, this morning, there's reporting that senior Iranian officials are telling Fars, that's a semi-official news agency in Iran, that renewed fighting between the U.S. and Iran is, quote, likely. But Trump last night in Florida saying he's not satisfied with the proposal they've gotten so far.
So they want to make a deal, but I'm not satisfied with it. So we'll see what happens. Iran wants to make a deal because they have no military left, essentially, and they want to make a deal, but I'm not satisfied with it.
Apologies. Obviously, that was the president on his way to Florida, not quite there yet. Where does that leave us, Paul? Is there any chance of these negotiations moving forward anytime in the near future?
It's in some ways it's hard to see us moving forward from here. We've been in a ceasefire since around April the 7th. And in that time, there's been almost no signs that the 2 sides are willing and able to move towards peace talks in Pakistan or another third country like that, let alone actually reach a formal deal to end this war that began in late February. I would say we've got a double blockade at the moment of the Strait of Hormuz, and that's what's slowing us down at the moment. It's Iran effectively stopping all commercial vessels from going through the waterway, and the U.S. blockading Iran's ports. Iran says that blockade has to be lifted and ended by the U.S. for the 2 sides to go towards peace talks. Trump and the White House are saying they're not going to do that, and they seem to be satisfied that the blockade is working in terms of squeezing Iran's economy, stopping it from getting its vital oil exports out. And as Becca mentioned, the White House seems to be convinced that it's going to be only a short amount of time before Iran has reached tank tops, has filled up its storage, and will have to start shutting down wells, which again the White House claims will be pretty devastating for those wells in the long term. But there's a lot of debate in the oil market about how long Iran actually has left, and even if it has to shut down wells, a lot of people are saying that it will take that option, and it would prefer that than making concessions to the U.S. So at the moment, it is hard to see how there's going to be a breakthrough, because we've just seen nothing really since the ceasefire started barely just under a month ago.
Yeah,
we're going to talk about those wells and how under duress they might be with Javier Blas here in just a bit, our colleague who covers energy for Bloomberg Opinion. Jeff Mason, let me have you dovetail what we've been talking about with domestic politics. So the president traveling down to Florida, giving a speech speech at the Villages, a retirement community in Florida, then making his way to Palm Beach on the heels of that for the event that we saw clips of there just a moment ago. I look at this latest polling from ABC, Washington Post, and Ipsos on the Iran war, and one question in particular. Considering everything, do you think the United States did the right thing in using military force against Iran, or do you think this was a mistake? 36% of respondents say right decision. 61% say it was a mistake. This is something I am sure the president is cognizant of. And how do you think, or how do you understand him to be kind of navigating, yes, the foreign policy side of this, trying to come to a deal while this is kind of biting at his heels?
It's a political albatross for him. And I think that's reflected not only in the polling that you just referenced, but also the fact that he's beginning to do some of this domestic travel that he had anticipated doing about 2 months ago. I mean, the White House was signaling to us, to reporters, that the president was going to do this long tour, domestic travel tour, to talk about politics, to talk about his economic record, to lift up some of his accomplishments over the last year and a half ahead of the midterms. And then all of that went by the wayside because of this war. The fact that he's talking about it and making his case in the Villages in Florida, I think, is at least a sign that this is something he wants to start doing and making that case. But the war is not popular, and that's a problem for him politically. I would also add, I heard Becca make her argument for why he might be considering starting strikes again. I actually think the reasoning about the China trip coming up is a reason why he wouldn't. In part because the president wants to go to China. He's canceled it once already. And that's going to be a point of tension between him and Xi Jinping. If the U.S. is in active fighting again with Iran at the same time that he goes to Beijing, that could overhang that trip in a way that he doesn't want it to.
You're supposed to go. Do you have a refundable ticket, or are you confident it's going to happen?
It's not on Spirit, is it?
Flying out on Air Force One.
Okay, all right.
All right, fancy. Well, then I'm going to ask this question of Becca. I know you want to talk about it, but I'm going to let Becca do it instead. Becca, I want to ask you about this. On Friday, the Pentagon said the U.S. is going to withdraw 5,000 troops from military bases in Germany. And then this morning, early our time, we've got a tweet from a NATO spokesperson saying, quote, "We are working with the U.S. to understand the details of their decision on force posture in Germany. This adjustment underscores the need for Europe to continue to invest more in defense and take on a greater share of the responsibility for our shared security." America has about 33,000 troops in Germany. I'm an Army brat. My brother was born on a military base in Germany. Is this operationally significant, these 5,000 troops, or is this more Trump trying to get back at the German chancellor, who has said some things the president has not liked recently?
I think it's a lot more of the latter. Listen, this was always foreseeable. There's been long discussions about reducing U.S. force presence in Germany, not only in the first Trump administration, but, essentially what this move does is it reduces U.S. force posture in Germany to what it was prior to 2002, where there was a plus up in the wake of Russia's wanton aggression of Ukraine. So I think the big thing here is not necessarily the number of forces, but it's a question about where those forces are, with some bases in Germany being more operationally important than others, but also more of a question of the message that this sends to U.S. allies and adversaries alike. Obviously, Germany has been, frankly, planning for this since 2017 when it was first brought up. This in itself is not new, but it's the matter of which it has been messaged to them as, essentially a dig after Merz's comments about President Trump. And also the way in which it's being messaged to Vladimir Putin, the very person who that increased force presence was intended to deter.
Jeff, we've got about a minute. Merz saying the U.S. is being, quote, humiliated by Iran's leadership and that they're basically outfoxing the U.S. in these negotiations.
The president just does not like to hear criticism, let alone from a fellow world leader, about this war. And he's been talking about his frustration with NATO. Germany, of course, is a major NATO member, for not stepping in to help with the Strait of Hormuz. He made these comments even after that visit from King Charles, where King Charles made a pretty impassioned case in his speech to Congress for uplifting NATO and for helping to fund Ukraine. President Trump not happy with Germany, and I think that's absolutely at the root of this decision.
I feel like it's deja vu all over again. I remember when he was mad at Merkel in the first administration. It was 100%. The first time this came up.
And at that point, he threatened to take 9,500 troops out of Germany. Right. They started that, but then didn't finish it. Yeah.